everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Beth Roberts, and I will be your host for today. We have Michael Garber joining us to talk about innovating your organization as if the planet depends on it, a call to action for corporate and nonprofit innovators. So thank you, Michael, for joining us. A little bit about Michael. He is the founder and managing partner of the Southern Growth Studio, an innovation insights and strategy boutique in Memphis, and a co-founder of the Memphis Innovation Bootcamp. And I'm going to let Michael continue and tell you a little bit about himself and why this topic today.
I appreciate any kind of participation, so feel free to get off mute or put something in the chat. I am the managing partner of the Southern Growth Studio. And at Southern Growth Studio, we focus primarily on insights, innovation, and strategy. But we see this whole emerging practice area of our business, which is helping guide companies, organizations, nonprofits into what we call purposeful transformations. And they see that by being on purpose, they're able to have more meaning, galvanize their troops, be more profitable, and do some good on this planet. And so this topic is near and dear to me. And I've realized as an innovation practitioner, what really excites me is to see the lights go off inside individuals when we're inside corporations and organizations facilitating. And with that, it comes the inevitable question. It's almost philosophical. Now that the lights have been turned on, what next, right? And then simultaneously, we live in a very precarious point of our history, geologically, right? We have entered three great crises, and we can't really deny these crises. We have the climate crisis going on simultaneously. We have a great humanitarian crisis and more refugees around the planet than we've ever had in our history. And then, as you can just see by North American politics, and I'm not going to get political, don't worry, but just how the discourse has been taken into echo chambers. We live in this third crisis of truth and meaning, right? Where it's hard to really ferret out what the objective truth is. And so with these three great crises of our era, what everybody's longing for is substance and meaning and purpose, right? We feel like the truth has just become so subjective. Meanwhile, other species are suffering, we're seeing some of this toll, our species is suffering. And so the inevitable question is, now that the lights are on, what can we do about it? And because we don't trust that political solutions will be fast enough, how does that become a corporate responsibility is the next question, right? And then just because corporations are what they are, how do they get a return from this call to action? Beth, I hope that's a decent start.
Absolutely, yeah. And so when you and I chatted a little bit, Michael, you really talked about, and I think a lot of our theme for today is around the human to human experience and connection. And when you talk about people searching for truth and meaning, and really about connecting with other humans. And so how is that different, that human to human connection and human to human experience? How is that different than kind of the way we had been approaching work and the world prior to now?
Great question. Thank you, Beth. I'm going to start with a story and sort of ease my way into your question. Probably take about 5 minutes, if that's okay. I was in Atlanta, and in Atlanta, I was working with one of the large razor companies, right? Obviously, I don't use their products very often since COVID hit. We were looking at all these various concepts that would have, you would have some kind of electronic charge device. It could be a smart device. It had things like heated foam in it. Definitely not a straight razor, and not, say, a 6-blade razor with some kind of guard, but something that stood on a base that you could use but was waterproof. But in order to do that, we had to recruit extreme users. So if you think extreme users and razors, what comes to mind, right? Very, very hairy people, right? And so we recruited two groups to look at these concepts. Co-creation was was what we were doing. One was extremely hairy females, and that session was amazing. And these women, I'm blushing. I have two grown daughters now and a granddaughter, but what people will tell you when you build trust and rapport with them will make you blush. That the plight of these women preparing for a date night, the ways they have to stretch, people with hair on their backs and hair on their forearms that they have to shave off or do something twice a day, mustaches, you name it, was just incredible. And the next day we had the men. So if you think of very hairy men, these are alpha males we recruited, Navy SEALs, Army Rangers. These guys were cut. They would walk in the room and all of a sudden I felt like we were importing excessive testosterone from bulls. You could just feel the danger in the room. It was so palpable. And then there was a guy who was late, and I don't know how he came through on the screener. He was the archetypal hipster, right? He had a skull cap and a long beard. He worked at a vape shop, and he smelled of that substance that's now legal for recreation in many states and for medical use in others. He was in the car baking, and just came in, was disruptive. He wanted to dismiss the whole category. Being this hipster, authenticity was what he was after. And I don't know why everything has to look like an iPod. Can't you just give me a straight razor, some strap razor? And so I was about to bounce him out, but then we came to this one concept that tested better than anything else with the female participants. And it looked almost like a shower head, like a massager, and it had very curved and feminine lines. And when we got to that, most of the alpha males turned their workbook, which was on paper, upside down. The shape embarrassed them. No, heck no. No way, I'm not touching that, But he said, guys, I've got a confession to make, okay? And anybody says that in our line of work, you listen very deeply, right? Human to human work. He said, I've got a very hairy back, and my mom used to shave it for me, and now my girlfriend does. And one of the Marines hit the table, stood up and pointed and said, she's a keeper. And I had this kind of a static moment, right? If you get human beings together and you're just talking about something, they're going to give their best to community, and they're going to reinforce the morals and mores that really work for them. And in that kind of a static moment, I just loved my job. It was, I was hearing angels singing. It was marvelous. I had this insight that, one, the more that we work on solving real needs for real people, the less junk we're going to create just to make money, right? And real people helping each other was what it was all about. So centering on real needs, and that's no surprise with design thinking or jobs to be done or any of the popular methodologies, figuring out the real needs. But then I did some research, and I do want to ask everybody here, and please don't Google it. I don't want your guess, not your knowledge. AccuPoll does an annual poll of hard goods, meaning consumer goods or durable goods. How many products are created and launched each year that fail? Want to put a few guesses in the chat? I'm going to look. What percentage of products that launch fail on an international basis? Durable goods, consumer goods, per year. Someone said 85. Christopher, Steve says 75. 84, 90, 95. Yeah, Chelsea is right. 95%. So you think about all the waste that's created, and then you think all these different, and why? Just to make money. And our old model of producing and conceiving of product development is broken. That's equally true with software and nonprofit initiatives. We create something because we think it's a good idea. The executive has some kind of caffeinated synapse after running in the shower, and then comes to his mahogany boardroom and tells everybody to start making it. And then you spend millions of dollars, many years launching something that just ends up in the graveyard, in the ocean, in the landfills, or worse, at the bottom shelf at Big Lots, right? With a bargain or a bargain hunt or somewhere like that. Those are massive bargain stores for products that are discontinued. And so the model was broken. So this is where it gets substantive in the story. That's our inherited model of product development. And this idea of unlimited growth without consequences just to make money has put us in this predicament that has led to a lot of the conditions that I talked about with these three crises, right? We're force-fed what to believe about the products. We don't really care about the output climate-wise of these products. We're just doing it for very singular reasons. Money's not bad. Money's wonderful. I love money. But it seems to be if we have a different system of value, you can think about it differently. And so then working in innovation inside a lot of engineering heavy and manufacturing heavy clients, I've seen that same predicament again and again and again, in that you have rising R&D costs, and then your return is flat or less, right? Rising R&D cost takes longer and more expensive to make products, tool and die products, get products on the shelves or however they're going to market. And then, and so that's what I call a predicament, a problem without a solution. And I could give you case after case of why that is. I just take one of our clients, Dr. Scholes. They would spend 3-4 years and several $1 million to come up with an insole, right? And then they would put it on the shelf. Now, thanks to private label, their primary sales channel became the primary competition. And then they would take everything they learned and all that intellectual property, all that research time and money, and then they would launch a private label product. Used to take 6 months to copy. Now, 6 weeks, sometimes even a week, and they can just take that whole planogram, for example, and commoditize everything and make it a price war. They'll take the reasons to believe, the features, the benefits, make an equally good product and charge $7 instead of $20 because they don't have to recoup all of that cost. And this is true in B2C, in B2B, otherwise. And even the way that we think about product development in kind of the linear, stage-gated manner has all of its inputs from the Industrial Revolution, right? And so if we get to the heart of the matter, how we are thinking about business, this whole MBA mindset is very objectifying. I'll give you a few examples, right? One is just the whole field of marketing, literally an archery term, to hit the mark. So if I'm thinking of Beth as my target, Beth is female, works a white collar job. I could keep going, but suddenly she becomes an object instead of a subject. And the way we think of, she's B2C, B2B, she fits, she's got these price thresholds. Instead of really understanding Beth and understanding her needs and creating something she's going to use that's not wasteful to her, that's not wasteful to the planet, it's not something she's going to try once. And then the whole field of manufacturing engineering is kind of in the same boat, right? And then if you peel the layer once more, it's all based on this for-profit only model. And everyone always quotes, one of the great writers on why we do that. Why do we have this profit only model? And if you go back and you read sort of the early literature of capitalism, Adam Smith wrote 2 great books. One is kind of on that paternalistic, militaristic side, the masculine side of the polarity, which is about for-profit. And that was the template of the MBA schools. But he also wrote a book that is highly neglected about the community commons at maternal aspects of capitalism, right? And no one ever really talks about that. No one quotes it, except there's a guy named Raj Sisodia who started the conscious capitalism movement. And this whole idea of a triple bottom line gets us a lot closer, where if something's good, it's not good just because it has a profit, but more importantly, because it's got the profit motive, and different stakeholders, all people at the company or the suppliers are also seen as equally important as stakeholders. That's one of the 3 Ps: people, profit, people, and the other is planet, right? And so this multiple return, not just think of money as the measure of all things, but getting to a quality of life enables us to move forward in this model. That's one mental model that begins to break that. And so I'm about to stop, but I'll just add one other point. And that is that in my experience working with corporate innovators, you know this intuitively, and you want to do the right thing for all of these constituencies, and you understand how it would benefit the organization, how it would benefit the culture of the organization, how it would benefit your community, how it would benefit the planet. I see innovators as almost living cells in the dying body as we're moving to a different era, moving away from what was known as the Industrial Revolution, which gave us that template, moving even past the post-industrial digital age into this human-to-human era, where it's going to be contingent upon us for the survival of our species and our caretaking of other species to actually put these principles into practice.
That's great, Michael. It's such an interesting concept about, traditional education and how many people that go through an MBA program that then go into business learn very businessy things and not quite enough people,
Right.
People and planet, right? You bring that into it and talking about this corporate conscious capitalization, right? And how are we really going in with our hearts as well, right? And
Yep.
being mindful of the impact that we're having on the world. And so we talked about one of our poll questions for today, right? And looking at our current education system. So if everybody can just take a second to look at our first poll question, is the current form of education what we need for helping our world?
I look forward to seeing the responses. It may be contingent on where you live and where you study, but
yeah. So we'll give that another minute. But Michael, do you want to talk a little bit more about while we're waiting for everyone to finish that? Talk a little bit more about like the innovator's role versus a corporation's role in this human-to-human era.
So happy to do that. But before I do that, I do want to pragmatically equip innovators to have this conversation. And in doing so, I would refer you to Dr. Sisodia's book, The Firms of Endearment. They did a 10-year longitudinal study of companies that are putting these practices, someone called it the connection economy, but this human-to-human era model into practice. And they saw that the companies that are value-based companies, as it's been called, were able to outperform profit-only companies. Get this, 17-1. And this was a long longitudinal study, 17-1. And on a few of the famous case studies in that book include a lot of benchmarks you'll know, Patagonia, Ben and Jerry's, others, right, who stand by their values, and it becomes part of the DNA of their brand, their culture, how they think of corporate gifts, how they think of product development. It becomes really a part and participle of how they are, and often in their founding documents, sometimes as a B Corp, sometimes just on their own. So I do think that you can begin to make an economic argument if you're doing empathy with your C-level stakeholders, right? And they just want to talk money. You can talk about how money will follow if they follow these other principles, these other models, and how they'll also get many other kinds of benefits. They can begin to measure those benefits. But in terms of the innovator's role, innovators are in charge with creating net new value. Right? That's ultimately what we do. We're not process optimizers. We create net new value for the firms with whom we work. And there's no better way to create net new value than something that's going to give a return that has, yes, an economic return, an ROI, but then also different types of strategic returns. Furthermore, you, my friends, you brave innovators, you are the ones who are the human advocates here. You are the voice of the customer. You do the empathy work. You figure out the needs. You figure out the jobs to be done. You figure out the unspoken desires of these people. And so in that role of humanitarian diplomat, right, you become, again, their adversary. You're already standing up for people at a large scale. And I would say just thinking outside of innovation as product development, service development, business model innovation. Imagine if you were able to go and include everybody from diversity and inclusion in this conversation, from the sustainability department in this conversation, from corporate responsibility in this conversation, from HR in this conversation. It's with some of our best clients. We'll actually work with the HR departments and start training everybody in these methods, these mindsets, these behaviors, and you see that whole chrysalis process happening. And that chrysalis process is interesting. I am going to mention that, and then we'll come back to the poll if we can. And the organization, I always tell our corporate sponsors when we work with the C-level and kick off an engagement, really it's like love. You know, your partner has to be both capable and willing to making this change. And, you know, the organization may not be. Sorry. Pleasures of working from home. So with that, 1 second. Come here. We better go to the poll, then I'll finish that thought.
Okay, yeah. So looking to share the results, right? The current form of education is what we need for helping our world. And looking at, you know, we had 10 respondents, 90% saying we have a long way to go. And I think it's, I think there's such a, not to be political, but you spurred a bunch of thoughts for me there, Michael, around, you know, our current, I think what's gone on in the world in the last year has certainly impacted everyone in different ways. But if you also think about how businesses have evolved over time, right? Education alone, having to figure out a new approach in the last year with everybody at home. But you also think about some of those departments that you mentioned in businesses needing to be involved in this methodology around really being innovators and understanding this human to human era, and departments that didn't exist in companies 5-10 years ago. Diversity and inclusion teams, sustainability teams, right? These things are a bit newer. And when many people that are leading corporations today got their MBAs, those things didn't exist. They weren't part of the conversation.
That's right. And so I think that innovators have almost an intrinsic call to be leading those conversations, to do what we do best, which is radical collaboration and bringing these cross-departmental conversations, and even thinking about how we ultimately measure and get a return for all these things at a corporate scale, right? So you can be the facilitator of all these conversations and begin to make this movement possible. I was sorry about the dog, but it's one of those things. I was talking about that chrysalis. So what's fascinating about that process is that if you study butterflies, it's the only species that when they cocoon, they actually turn into a primordial soup. And biologists call it imaginal cells, imaginal cells. You know, and a tractor can no more think about becoming a Learjet than a caterpillar can become a butterfly. If you think, it's wild. But the idea that you have to be fluid as you're really thinking about the aspiration of your transformation. And no one is more comfortable in uncertainty than innovators. Hence another point of the innovator's role and calling to play a role in how we transform our organizations to better serve the species, the planet, our society.
Yeah, and I want to go back to something you mentioned around these value-based companies, right? And you know, you mentioned Patagonia, you mentioned Ben and Jerry's. A call to the group. Who in your sphere, in your world that you experience, do you feel are other values-based companies that you hold in high regard? If you want to chime in verbally, or you can put it in the chat.
Maybe throw the question in the chat so that people have some time to ponder it as well.
Yes. Thanks, Brown Ray.
It's a great question.
Whole Foods.
Thank you, Shelley. Yep. Yeah, John Mackey actually wrote the book, the first conscious capitalism book, with Raj Sisodia, and was their first chairperson. Southwest Airlines, yeah, that's a great story as well. Zappos, yes.
Zappos.
I think another interesting trend that I'm seeing is the movement of craft industries. Maybe not like one huge corporation that's doing like amazing things, but like the craft brewing industry, and how intense they are on making sure they're sourcing their ingredients from legitimate people like farmers, and they're taking care of the farmers. They're making sure it's high quality output. Yep. Same with the craft chocolate industry, and how they're super serious about giving back to the world. And so it's almost like these smaller businesses are banding together as an industry to create the change.
Yeah, you look at Tony's as a great, sorry, there was a cyber pause. You look at Tony's as a great example in the chocolate industry, right? Whose whole brand is values-based. We do not use slave labor making this delicious chocolate, unlike everybody else. And you may not know about that, but that's their position, and that's who they are, and that's how they invest. So I think you're right in terms of craft beer, craft coffee, craft marijuana, craft sake. And then the interesting point here is that all of these craft companies who are getting a much better return are actually now, especially in craft brewery, but they're actually all now bought up by large conglomerations and big companies, right? If you look at the map of who owns which food companies, which beer companies, there are very few owners. But what they're finding is that these values-based companies, these companies with something, a double bottom line, a triple bottom line, a quadruple bottom line, that stand for something, they're worth more. They have more brand equity, they have more loyalty, less churn. And so I could give you so many examples, but just go to Ben and Jerry's. Ben and Jerry's is actually owned by Unilever now, and has been run and operated by Unilever. But because they bought a B Corp and it was sacrosanct that their values are, and their point of view is part of the DNA of the brand, they can't water that down. They still have to source, for example, their brownies and their cookies from a bakery that hires recovering drug addicts at about $20 million a year, giving such a social halo, providing jobs and goodwill to people in recovery who probably couldn't find good jobs somewhere else, right? And that's just one way they invest. Same thing's true in the beer and the chocolate industry, very much. But they're smart enough to bake these things in their founding documents. So even if they get, I'm going to use air quote here, in the hands of a greedy, old world, old line corporation, their values are still sacrosanct wherever they can express it. And so that becomes a key point of value.
And consumers are demanding that more and more now, that they understand that the values of the companies that they're giving their money to. that it's important how those companies conduct themselves. And sometimes that goes maybe a little too far, right? Again, not to get political, there's some extremism in that. But you know, I didn't know that about Ben and Jerry's. That's really fascinating, and such good that they're doing in the world that has an impact on so many people that would otherwise be ostracized in some ways.
So everything they source has to have a social good from that point of origin, which is bake that in your metrics. And how do you take that is if you're going to be building a product as an innovator, how are you carefully handling sourcing? How are you working with sourcing and procurement to have that conversation, right? And making sure that it's not just hotboxing someone for the lowest potential cost for plastics, for example. Right?
Yeah.
So that's another point of the innovator's role.
Yeah, I love it. So looking at how innovators, I'm going to go a different direction. You just talked about, you just said something that sparked something for me. You talked about, or you and I discussed a case study about a plastics company. Do you want to share a little bit about that and about how they're looking towards the future?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So we started doing some innovations and insights projects with a plastics company. They'll remain not named right now. And they provide a lot of food service packaging materials, both rigid and PET. And we help them grow market share very meaningfully through doing design thinking projects and insights projects, and even some strategy projects on new markets they could enter. Meanwhile, there were market forces. Sustainability is real. In the plastics industry, this is what they're calling the third wave of sustainability. But this time it's real. There's more than 200 bits of pending legislation. CPG companies alone have very, very lofty and aspirational, but pragmatic sustainability goals by 2025, 2030 that they must hit. You've probably seen the Amazon commercials about their sustainability goals. It's real this time. And so with those consumer forces at hand, we were able to take a lens through innovation and say, what does the market really want? How do we help the CPG companies meet their aspirations, hit their sustainability goals? And there's so much pie in the sky in terms of sustainability and products that don't yet work well, a lot of biomaterials than other. And the technical R&D is one side, but then to help this company, first starting with innovation. And I'm going to say, because we started with innovation, their change readiness was there. They had the mindsets and the behavioral practices to accept new thinking, right? Which that's the role of the innovator, is priming that, tilling that soil, so to speak. And then we were able to help them envision company-wide, what do we look like as a company that no longer is in the plastics business 5 to 10 years from now? And then backward engineer, what are the steps we're going to take to do that? And how do we, help these companies meet their goals, at the same time work toward having a position where we have a lot of IP with sustainable, renewable materials, but more importantly, are at that level of conversation of sustainability with the C-level at all these companies. Because a lot of the current initiatives, something like a TerraCycle, as much as I love what they're doing, they're just not there yet, right? They're certainly exploring the right areas, but it just doesn't work because you have the old line businesses willing to make change up to a point, change practices up to a point, change materials up to a point, and then you have the whole circular economy with its new way of doing things. It doesn't work with this existing paradigm, this existing business model. So in that gap between those two worlds is a great opportunity that helps not only the company, but the planet. So you can imagine how holistic their change is, right? We work with the HR department. We make sure that We work with the managers of each department and then down at the managerial level to rewrite their divisional strategies according to this North Star strategy, change their practices, help them identify new talent, do assessments, all of that work.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and it's so important. You talk about the innovator's role and helping to create the, not to use an old term, but the burning platform, right? The case for change, and getting everyone in the organization at every level and kind of in every department to open their minds to
Right.
where everyone's headed, or where we need to be headed as an
Yeah.
organization, where they need to be headed, and that it's possible, right? Opening their minds to possibility.
That's right.
I think
Now, I would say,
is
Beth,
such a yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, that comes with a warning in that you only get one or two chances to really have that conversation, and you have to discern what that right. If you're just talking about futures and trends and pressures and analyst reports, you're going to become the Chicken Little there and never have any credibility. So I would say, think about what the needs of the organization, think about where the future is going to be, kind of think about opportunity cost if they don't make that shift and pivot, and find the right moment when they're in a little bit of an inflection point to have that meaningful conversation. I see Toby Fowler has his hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Toby.
Hi, I apologize for the tardiness. I was in a meeting that ran over. I just wanted to compliment something that Michael was saying there, and kind of hone in on it for a second. So when you're talking about all the different departments, I wanted to highlight that mentality. I really like and appreciate that mentality there, where anybody can be an innovator, right? It's not a special skill set. And the more departments, the more individuals, the more personnel that you reach out to and give them the opportunity to add, to contribute, then the more innovation you are going to get, because you're not just thinking, oh, we need to reach out to just the engineers, or we need to reach out to just the finance people if it's a financial situation for you're looking for innovation. But to reach out to everybody, give everybody that opportunity.
That's so true. And what a great point, Toby. Thank you. There really are two chasms we need to cross using the language of innovation. One is the innovator's dilemma of knowing that we have a solution that is unproven, and because there's no benchmark, because it's net new, we have to prove the ROI before the suits will sign off on it. That's the classic innovator's dilemma. We all live that, right, as corporate innovators. But the other is actually working on those mindsets, those behaviors throughout a company, because the biggest impediment to launching meaningful innovations and the type of change we're talking about is internal, and it's cultural, and it's organizational. And if we don't work on those issues, identify our orthodoxies, our mental models, and begin to change, again, those mindsets and behaviors to receive good ideas from wherever they may come, and really democratize innovation within the organization, we'll never live up to our potential. So thank you, Toby, for that.
So Michael, this has been excellent, and we're wrapping to our last 5 minutes, and I want to make sure we give the group an opportunity to ask questions, but we have one more question to kind of spark your thinking in a poll to wrap us up a little bit. But absolutely, we still have time. We want to hear your questions and thoughts, but I'll leave this poll up here for you while we're doing that, which is, are you bringing forth the human to human era in an official or unofficial capacity in your work? And then if you'd like to share while you're thinking about that question, if you'd like to share your thoughts or have questions for Michael, you can just unmute and come on, or you can throw them in the chat if you're more comfortable.
I can't wait to see your responses.
I'll leave that up for about a minute. So.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I hope we'll just want to make sure that as we talk about this human to human era, it's based on real needs, real people, and then gets beyond what I'll call our speciocentricity, if you will, big word. It's not only about people, but everything else. that for which we share our habitat, right? Because without that, we don't stand a chance. The atmosphere is pretty bad on Mars right now. We haven't converted it yet, right? And we don't quite have the airships to take everybody there. I'm not sure that's the best solution for that planet anyway.
So our poll, a pretty good mix actually. And you know, I left the poll anonymous, so I don't know who said what. You know, we have both ends of the spectrum there. We've got people that are doing it every day, some that are trying, and we've got people that are like, no, not really. And so I'm curious, if you're willing, if you're a not really, is that because it hadn't occurred to you, like you hadn't thought about it? Is it that there's not an opportunity? I'm curious.
Beth, may I ask that a different way?
Absolutely.
Do you see that as a role within innovation to bring forth this wave of living on a planet that we can actually live into and have a future? Is that a role of innovation or not? Right? You can just shake your head. You can get thumbs up. I wish they had a thumbs down icon. Or should it be? Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I certainly think it can be. Just from my standpoint, it really hasn't occurred to me to try and bring that into innovation. So it's a new concept for me. So something I'll have to think about more and see how I can bring that into the organization.
Yeah.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you. Yeah, you have to question why did you get into innovation in the first place, right? And that's where I was. There's the tyranny of the novel, but then there's also something that's substantive, right? What is real change? What does that look like? What does that mean at scale? Right? Those are the meaty, juicy, complex, ambiguous problems that probably all drive us forth. I know that doing some innovation talent assessments, innovators have been shown to judge their career success, not necessarily by their title or their money, but by how complex the problems are they're solving, right? And so that's a great benchmark. And then nothing's more complex than changing an organization to do good in the world.
Maybe terraforming Mars.
Hey, that's an ambitious, auspicious goal, indeed.
What other questions are there or comments?
I got it's not a question, I guess it's more of a comment, but I think tying the two together, right? We're talking about, Mars atmosphere terraforming, which is obviously a much larger problem than an individual or a company. It's a global problem, right? A solar size problem. And then, tying that into what we're talking about with the human to human, at my previous employer, we refer to it as human collisions, right? Quite often, boots on the ground is another term that's used for it. But if we try to tie the similarities together between those two anecdotes, what you're really talking about is a first to market, right? You're talking about, how do you innovate? How do you design? How do you think for something new it's got an extensive amount of value add or value proposition, right? And one of those aspects is first to market, right? I've heard, companies saying, well, hey, how can we get to the moon to harvest I think it's tritium or heavy something or other, right? The helium or hydrogen blows off of the sun and things of that nature. So, regardless of the complexity of the problem and the size of it, where's the value to tackle it, right? Michael had mentioned, well, do good for the human race or to better the environment. And some cultural aspects for different businesses is, well, how do we just make more money, right? And some entities just don't have a very strong sustainability initiative. So some of the aspects here is really boiling down to what's the value proposition? Is it to look more greener? Is it to make more money? And then I think that where that kind of, not blindsides, but where that kind of puts the blinders on some companies is that they hone in on that one particular aspect, right? I want to be green, so let's put all the eggs in that basket. Or we want to make more money. How do we come up with new innovative products? And just not looking at it from a more broad perspective.
Yep, that's so true. And I'll end my share just by saying it's been proven that the firms that think about a triple bottom line, a double bottom line, some ways of giving back to the planet and their communities and sourcing things responsibly become leaders and become first to market, but also category leaders. And so as companies begin to think about their ROI models, they're going to be different types of returns in this human to human era that is evolving. And I do believe that Toby, you're right in your line of thinking. What are the value propositions for these different types of returns, and how can innovators be the catalyst of having those conversations? So that's the challenge I want to hold up to all of you.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Michael. It's been it's such a fascinating topic, and I've loved talking with you about it. And thank you, everyone, for your contributions to the session. Join us on social media. We're going to post this recording in our online network, Mighty Networks, which we'll share some information about to keep this conversation going. We're glad to have you. We have an upcoming session with one of our guests that was here earlier who had to leave, Steve Palladino, on how can lean and design play nicely together. And that is happening on April 21st. You can check out our website to register for that one. So thanks, everyone, and have an excellent day.
Thank you, Beth. You're a wonderful host. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael.
Appreciate you guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care, everyone.